What shape is the ring fort?
A ring circle.
Who at the beginning realised the fort was important and did a lot of work in clearing it?
No idea.
What shape is the ring fort? Circle. Who at the beginning realised the fort was important and did a lot of work clearing it? Mr. Gordon. When did this happen?
14, 15 years ago.
What would you find around the ring fort?
Today, you find that basically the entrance, what would have been to the rath itself, and the ditches, which were more or less, which tells us the shape of the fort itself and what it was.
What would you find around the ring fort?
Grass and mud.
What would you find around the ring fort?
Don't know. Is it grass?
Muck.
Oh.
What do you think life was like back then when people lived in the fort 1,000 years ago?
Terrible.
What would you find around the ring fort?
At the minute it doesn't look like much, but you can clearly see the ring around the fort. Okay, and I dare say that if it was excavated, you'd find a lot of bones, pottery, which would have remained from the time.
Why was the ring fort a safe place for people to live in 1,000 years ago?
Because its walls protect them from bandits and it's just anything that's would hurt them.
How old do you think the fort is?
Probably it was built in the 7th century, I think. I'm not sure.
How old do you think the fort is?
1,000 years.
Why was the ring fort a safe place for people to live in? What do you think life was like back then when people lived in the fort 1,000 years ago?
I think life would have been very difficult. People would have had a very basic existence in those times. They would have felt under threat as well. That's why they may have had the mud walls to keep them safe. So they would have been living in fear, possibly, but they would have had a very basic existence and lived off the land.
Why was the ring fort a safe place for people to live in 1,000 years ago?
Because they were surrounded.
What do you think life was like back then when people lived in the fort 1,000 years ago?
I think life would have been grim. There would have been no TV, no electricity, no straighteners, no running water, no sewage, so it would have been a very basic lifestyle.
Do you think it's important having an ancient fort in our school grounds?
It is, yes it is. It's lovely to have it. We're very privileged to have one there and have one that's not been tampered with because it's still very much in its natural state.
How old do you think the fort is?
About 1,000 years old.
Why did most forts like this not survive into the 20th century?
Because there was housing, apartments and all built up in areas that blocked these natural sort of history places and stuff, so we couldn't really get to see them all.
Why was the ring fort a safe place for people to live in 1,000 years ago?
Well, the ring fort provided protection. Ring forts were largely built on hilly areas so that the people inside the ring fort had a view across the countryside and the lowlands, and that offered them protection. As well as that, the ring fort was surrounded by the moat or ditch, which offered additional protection.
Why did most forts like this not survive into the 20th century?
Due to numerous factors: industrialisation, land clearance, different types of farming. People didn't realise the value of what they had there. You take this Craigavon area, the place was coming down. If you look at old ordnance survey maps, you'll find raths all over the place. But when they built these housing estates and so on, particularly in the 60s, they knocked all these things out of the way to build Lismore School, to build the housing estates and so on. And that's an example of why they disappeared.
Do you think it's important having an ancient fort in our school grounds?
Most certainly. I think it's fantastic. Whenever I first came, I'm not from the area, so whenever I first came here I was very surprised that it wasn't named after a priest, but having done a little bit of research I can see now why it isn't. You know, St Francis, St John or whatever it is, you know, and the fact that it is Lismore and it's based on the fort is something to be celebrated and recognised, certainly.
Why? Could you suggest any ways we might make use of this ancient site in our school grounds?
We could build up maybe a wooden shed or something and put pictures, and maybe have a little DVD monitor or something running so people could watch the history instead of having to read about it, because everyone finds that boring.